have a presentation about the history of Syttende Mai and also the impact of that national day, how it is celebrated, and some of the features that we connect to Syttende Mai. For instance, you will see parades with bunads, with the national or regional costumes in Norway. Children, the new leaves on the trees, spring, is something that we associate with Syttende Mai, which means May 17th. This is a photo of the Oslo schools in front of the Royal Palace in Oslo, because all schools in Oslo usually participate in the parade. In 2020 and 2021 are the only years, in addition to the war years, World War II, that there hasn't been any parade in Oslo in the 20th century. This is also another photo showing children. This is taken in 2005, I think. You see the teachers and school children. They have been, they walk up the Karl Johans gate, the main street in Oslo. They just come in front of the Royal Palace where the king and his family are standing and waving, and then they walk and make the round back along Karl Johan at the other side of the street. So all children will be able to see the royal family. So this is a tradition that has been upheld for a long time, since 1906, in fact, when the new royal family came to Norway. And Syttende Mai, or May 17th, is also celebrated throughout Norway. You see here in rural areas all over. So this is national, really, it covers the entire countries, larger, smaller communities. So May 17th in Norway is also known as Constitution Day, the day when the Constitution was written. It's also referred to as National Day, or simply Syttende Mai, 17th of May. So how did this all start? We have to go back around 200 years in time. We have to go back to Europe around 1800. A continent ravaged by war. Napoleon was on the throne in France. He led several wars and alliances between countries in Europe. In 1807, he forged an alliance with Russia, which proved to be important because Russia was a mighty empire. So it was important for Napoleon to have this ally. The same year, Napoleon entered into an alliance with Denmark-Norway. Norway was in union with Denmark until 1814. But Denmark had been attacked by British sailing vessels because the British wanted to force the Denmark-Norway away from Napoleon's grip and to form an alliance with the British. But they bombed Copenhagen, as you see on this photo. This led to a very harsh reaction from the Danes, and they joined Napoleon as a reaction to the attack from the British Navy. 2 years later, Sweden, which was then Sweden and Finland, formed one country. Sweden loses Finland in a war with Russia. So I mention all these dates because they are important in order to understand why Norway wrote their constitution. In 1809, Sweden loses Finland to Russia. And Sweden is interested in revenge. Sweden, the royal dynasty disappears. The last king dies without leaving any heir. So the Swedish key Swedish persons, authorities, asked French general Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte to succeed the last king on the Swedish throne. They want a French general to take over the Swedish throne because he can represent Sweden in their ambitions to get Sweden back to a mighty power. Bernadotte accepts. He leaves the French army and joins a coalition against Napoleon, against his former ally and friend. And he aims to conquer Norway and to make up for the loss of Finland. Napoleon attacks Russia in 1812. They are allies. They've been allies for 5 years. Napoleon attacks Russia in 1812, just like Hitler did with the Soviet Union in 1941. Napoleon's attack leads to a defeat in 1814, and this defeat of Napoleon has large consequences for Norway. Because Sweden, which now is against Napoleon, they claim Norway at the peace negotiations in Kiel in Germany in 1814. Norway was given by the big powers of Europe from Denmark to Sweden in a way, without asking the Norwegians what about their what they thought about this. The Bernadotte, who was then the successor to the throne in Sweden, he was preoccupied with war on the European continent in the spring of 1814. And because the Swedish army was preoccupied with creating peace, establishing peace, they could not control what was happening in Norway. Because in Norway, things are taking place in the spring of 1814. This is a picture of Christian Frederick. He was the viceroy or the representative in Norway of the King of Denmark. He's also the heir to the Danish throne, or to the throne of Denmark and Norway. He was very against the secession of Norway to Sweden, and he took a lead in a movement toward Norwegian independence. And some historians have thought in the aftermath that his actions to get Norway to make Norway independent would in turn make it easier to get Norway back to a union with Denmark when Christian Frederick succeeded the Danish throne. So this was a strategic play, something. Christian Frederick did not mention that at the time, but this has been supposedly a theory afterwards. But what happens in Norway in the spring of 1814 is that Christian Frederick, he gets together with the wisest persons in Norway, so-called Assembly of Notables, in February of 1814. He asks these people, do you think that I should claim the Norwegian throne and become King of Norway? The notables say, you could do so, but you have to ask the people first. So he must have, you say that because these leading figures in Norway, they are influenced by the age of enlightenment. They're inspired by the American Constitution. Democracy, the people must be asked, they must take part in this. You could not claim the throne as an authority and claim authority. He has to have the people on his side to do so. So the meeting of notables advised prince to arrange for an election for a Norwegian Constituent Assembly and to decide the form of government and elect the head of state from there. Frederick, who now has the title of regent, he gave instructions for elections in Norway to take place. And these elections were held in a manner that pastors in all churches of Norway asked all male adults to take part in an election of a person in their region to a constituent assembly, which was to get together in Eidsvoll. So all told, 112 people, males, were elected to convene at the Eidsvoll Manor in April of 1814 to create a Norwegian constitution. And the aim was to make Norway independent, an independent country. So these 112 delegates, who were not really 112, because the delegates from the northernmost counties in Norway had such a long distance to travel, so they didn't get to Eidsvoll before much later. But two parties, there was a development of two parties among these delegates. The Independence Party, which delegates wanted Norway to become an independent country, no union with Sweden. And the other party was the Unionist Party, those delegates supported a union with Sweden because that was the wisest thing to do. They did not believe that Norway could be an independent country because that could not be accepted by the larger powers of Europe. But the delegates agreed to the new constitution that was written between April and May, and they unanimously elected Christian Frederick as king of the self-declared Norwegian state on May 17th. And that is the reason why we celebrate May 17th or Syttende Mai as Norway's national day. But this was highly problematic because the Norwegians had done this despite the fact that Norway now was in union with Sweden, according to the Treaty of Kiel. And Bernadotte, the successor to the Swedish throne, was unaware of this. He was on the European continent with his army. So what would happen when he understood what had happened? We will see. This is an iconic painting that you may have seen by Oscar Wergeland, showing the proclamation of the Constitution on May 17th. You see Prince Christian Frederick seated to the right, and Christian Magnus Falsen, who then reads the Constitution with the 112 delegates in the background. And the room is still there. So some of you may have been to Eidsvoll. The room is still there because the building has been preserved as a national monument. The Norwegian Constitution, adopted on the 17th of May 1814, is the second oldest written constitution in the world, second after the Constitution of the United States. It's influenced by the Constitution of the United States and the French Constitution, and it is founded on the principles of the sovereignty of the people, the separation of powers, like you also have in the US, between a legislative, executive, and judiciary power. And it's also based on human rights. For instance, the freedom of speech and religion, the right to vote, and protection of value of property. Some changes have been taking place, among others, during the bicentenary of the constitution in 2014, when human rights laws connected to human rights were included in the constitution. But it has been pretty much unchanged for 200 years. So what happens now in 1814? Bernadotte learns about the Norwegian independence. He sends his army back to Norway because when his affairs on the continent has been arranged, Napoleon is now taken prisoner, and he can return to Sweden. He then declares war to against Norway. A short war breaks out. Sweden is victorious. He has to end this war quite fast, because he thinks that the longer that Norway endures and the longer that Norway can resist the Swedish attacks, Sweden will lose their support with the great powers. So he wants to have a quick and short war, and to have a declaration of peace quite away, relatively fast. And he gives concessions. He gives Norway the opportunity to keep their constitution with a few changes. So Norway and Sweden enter a personal union under a common king. So Norway gets a much more independent position than they had under Denmark. But despite this egalitarian appearance, Sweden becomes the leading partner. They have the king, and they are also the leading partner in foreign policy. This is a problem that eventually ends with the dissolution of the Union in 1905. But Karl Johan becomes the successor to the Swedish throne. He became the successor in 1810. He's elected King of Sweden in 1818. And you see the statue in front of the Royal Palace in Oslo. You see King Karl Johan on his horse, which is also a very well-known statue in Oslo. So now this is the background of the house Syttende Mai, why we celebrate Syttende Mai. But the first parade is thought to have taken place in Trondheim, the year after the constitution was signed. Wealthy citizens in Trondheim may have started to celebrate. But we have written evidence that there was a celebration both in Trondheim and in Christiania, the capital, in 1824. And it's thought that it's much likely that this celebration was a demonstration against the union with Sweden. Karl Johan did not want Norwegians to celebrate Syttende Mai. So by celebrating, they also, Norwegian citizens also demonstrated against the king. The editor of the Trondheim newspaper Adresseavisen, Mathias Conrad Pedersen, argued in the 1820s that Constitution Day should be a national day to include all groups in Norway. That's the first time that that the national day should be cover all of Norway is written. In 1826, there is evidence of a crowd of several thousand people gathering in Trondheim to sing national songs and to shout hooray. In 1829, we have an illustration of what we call the Battle of the Square. There was an incident in Christiania when a crowd of people wanted to show their support of a Norwegian independence, and the king, who had forbidden celebrations of Syttende Mai, sent the troops to attack and to stop the celebration. So no people were killed, but some people were hit with the sabers of the soldiers and to disperse the crowds. But this has later become known as the Battle of the Square, and I think that this was also a way of that kind of triggered more resistance among Norwegians. Intellectuals in Norway also started to support the idea of celebrating a national day. Norwegian poet Henrik Wergeland, that you see here, he had a key role in the resistance movement, and also wanted to include children. That's the first time that we hear about that children should take part in and the celebration. So he helped to transform the day from a celebration of patriotic pride into a celebration for the children. In 1836, 22 years after the Constitution was signed, the Norwegian Parliament launched a May 17 celebration. And this is the starting point of May 17 as Norway's National Day. King Karl Johan, who then opposed celebrations, died in 1844, and his son Oscar I became king, and he was more liberal towards celebrations than his father. So then people could start free to celebrate National Day more freely. Another intellectual, Norwegian poet, Bjørnstjerne Bjørnson, also helped build National Day in the consciousness of Norwegians. He was a teacher at the time in Peter Quam's school in Oslo, a private school, and they organized the first children's parade in 1870. Or a children's parade had been organized in 1869, but then a larger parade was organized in 1870, and about 1,200 boys took part in that first parade. The custom gradually spread to all schools throughout Norway. But it's interesting to note that the first parades, only boys were admitted. Girls were not allowed to join in the parade for the first time until 1889. Yeah, I will have a short mention about Syttende Mai and World War II, because now, as we enter the 20th century, Syttende Mai is celebrated throughout Norway. But World War II put a halt on this celebration. On April 9, 1940, the German Nazi, we saw the German Nazi occupation of Norway. And we see that the German troops parading on the Karl Johan Street, where school children should have walked about 1 month later to celebrate National Day. You see the crowd is standing, watching this happening, because the attack came suddenly. It was not thought that the Germans would attack at the time. But the Germans, it's also interesting that Norwegians were regarded as representatives of a higher race, the Germanic race. So Norwegians were not treated badly by the Germans unless you were in the resistance, or you did something that the Germans did not want you to do. That, among others, the Germans did not want Norwegians to celebrate the National Day, because that was an attack on the Germanic pride that they should represent. They should be Germanic and not think of Norway, because by celebrating Norway's National Day, they would also celebrate be positive toward the king of Norway, who then had lived in London. So what happened is that people did not want to stop celebrating, so they did this in secrecy. They gathered in woods, in remote rural areas, and celebrated with small parades that you see on the picture on the lower part here. So when German planes airplanes flew above areas, people ran into the forests with the flags and celebrated there. This is a photo from my mother's album. This is from my home farm in Valdres. And my mother is one of the girls on the photo here. This was an illegal celebration in 1942 or 1943 with my own family and two or three neighboring families. And she said that they had a short parade in the woods on the farm, quite a distance away from the closest German patrolling troops. And afterwards they went into the to the dwelling and had some hot drinks, and that was a celebration. So in 1941, the Germans gave Norwegians the right to celebrate May 17th by using flagpoles, but you could not wear a flag, and you could not use the Norwegian colors on your on stickers or on your clothes. But people continued to celebrate Syttende Mai by avoiding those rules. And this photo shows the Syttende Mai celebration in the spring of 1945. On May 8th, 1945, the peace treaty was signed with Germany, or the Germans, and the war was over. So this is the largest parade in the history of Kristiansand. That's the sign. That's the title of this article. And you see that people in Kristiansand are celebrating, and you see, you see the people with the hats. They are what we call Rus. I will return to that. They're or students. They have finished school and they now celebrate. They're done with many years of schooling. So the May celebration in 1945 was a big event, a big party. The Syttende Mai celebrations today is marked by certain groups who participate in the parade. It's also marked by a variety of costumes and certain types of food. The parades in Norway usually consist of borgertog. Borgertog is what we call people's parades. Consists of people who celebrate or support a person or a case. Persons representing various organizations. They wear a banner and they walk in the parade. And then you have the children's parade. The children's parade is a different parade. But they could take place at the same time or at different times. But usually both take place on the 17th of May. The People's Parade consists of adults. The role of the People's Parades have been reduced and have been removed in many areas today. This is a photo from Kristiansand. And you still find it in cities and in urban areas, especially. They take place in the afternoon, and as I mentioned, they consist of representatives from organizations. The children's parades is perhaps what is most interesting feature of Syttende Mai today. Here you see photo from Karl Johans gate. the main street in Oslo. And I think people think that there are about 100,000 people get together or are present along either in the parade or along the street on May 17th. And I've been there myself. I played in a music band, school band, and each school usually has a band. Most schools has a band, and the bands and the parades, the children's parades, walk in a row, so that schools with jubilees, the oldest schools with who celebrate, for instance, 100 years, 70 years or so, they are the first ones in the parade, and then you get down. So I think from more than 100 schools that take part in this large parade. After the parade, each school they return home to their home school by bus, and there are socials. There is a social at a local school organized by the parents, and they have activity like sack races, potato races, bicycling, ball throwing activities, etc. When the winner of the competitions usually receive smaller objects. There is also sale of ice cream, hot dogs, and cakes on the school property. And the schoolyard and sports arenas are usually decorated with new twigs from birch trees, with banners and Norwegian flags. A specific feature of Bergen is the buekorps. You see the parade with the drums. You see that they have a certain uniform. This is a buekorps, which is a bow corps or an archery brigade. This is a kind of a military. There's a military twist to it, and are traditional marching neighborhood youth organizations in Bergen who form bands. And this is a tradition that is only unique to Bergen in Norway. These organizations are also called battalions, and they were organized 150 years ago by the youth themselves. And the celebration in Bergen starts with a salute at 7 a.m. and a morning procession through the city, where the buekorps is one of the participants. And also the 17th of May committee with the citizens and music bands and Russ. National costumes or regional costumes are also an important feature of this 17th of May celebration. Originally, these costumes are tied to regional identity. You have a Sigdal bunad, you have a Rogaland bunad, Valdres, Sogn, etc. But now costumes are more subject to individual choice. And with Norway increasingly becoming a multicultural country, also our minority Norwegians have started to use regional costumes, as you see on this picture. These are some some well-known TV hosts in Norway with a minority background wearing bunads. I mentioned Russ. This is also an interesting feature in Norway. Russetog, or Parade of Russ. Russ is the name of a student who has finished 13 years of schooling. So it takes place in the last year of their final high school year, and they also always take part in the parade. They could have a separate parade on May 17th, both in the closest city and also in their home community, or they could take part with other organizations. They're usually dressed in colors according to the subjects that they take. This is the Rød Russ, or the red Russ, focusing of liberal arts subjects. Those who dress in blue usually have taken subjects more related to economy and business administration. And the word Rus is an abbreviated form from the Latin word depositurus or cornua depositurus, which means to deposit. It refers to the fact that the students should deposit or put away their horns. According to old customs, a person who was to be taken up as a student should dress like an animal with a horn on the forehead. The horns were deposited or removed in a ceremony to symbolize that the student had left their animal nature. So you see that so the present day Rus is far removed from the original meaning of the word, but Rus has remained, the name Rus has remained intact. The last part of this word in Latin. Food is also important. May 17th celebrations in Norway are associated with hot dogs, pop, and ice, and local traditions also tie in here. Families living close to the fjords, to the sea and rivers usually have fish. The fish is served cold. Inland and valley areas have rømmegrøt and spekemat, cured ham. Here you see some examples of that on this table. Cured ham and also at least some cured ham, I see. And the royal family is also a symbolic, unifies Norway with their presence on the balcony of the royal palace. And they greeted the people there from the balcony, except during the war years and the 2 past years due to COVID-19. We hope that they will reappear next year. May 17th is also celebrated in the United States. There are accounts about May 17th celebrations on sailing vessels prior to the Civil War. The spring was usually a time when most people chose to emigrate. April 14th was the date in Norway when you could finish your job with an employer, and you could choose to hire out to somebody else or to leave. So many people left their home community in April to emigrate. So with sailing vessels, May 17th was then a date that you were then on the sea, usually on a sailing vessel on May 17th if you left in April. So celebrations by Norwegian Americans became community gatherings eventually, and there's been a development of large parades in larger cities like Brooklyn, Seattle, also in Minneapolis, Chicago, but also in more rural communities, as you will see here. This is a program on 17th of May celebrations in the Upper Midwest this year. And you see several towns in Minnesota and also in Wisconsin and in Illinois. And several of these towns have an ethnic flavor, like Spring Grove, Stoughton, Westby, Milan are so-called ethnic communities that have upheld their Norwegian traditions for a long time. The Siemens Church is also an organizer of various events. So here you see the sack race in New York above, and Syttende Mai celebration in San Francisco, the lower photo. The Association of Norwegian Students Abroad celebrates Syttende Mai all over the world where there are students. So you see celebrations here clockwise from left to right, from Paris, Estonia, Australia, the North Sea, and Hawaii. 17th of May symbolizes peace and democracy today. It's also a way of unifying different cultures, different immigrant cultures to Norway under a common, with Norwegian flag. And from May 1947, May 17th is an official flag day, an official holiday where employees take the day off. And children and adults have celebrated May 17th more than most national days in the world. So May 17th has one of the most popular National Day festivities in all of Europe. I lived in France as a child. I remember the military parades on July 14th, which is a national day in France, which is so different from from my memories from in Norway, with ice cream, games, etc. So polls have shown that 70 to 80% of Norway's population take part in the celebration of National Day. And it has a much larger following as compared to Sweden and Denmark. So I thank you for your attention. Thank you. I'm ready for questions if there are any.
Yeah, if I could start before Jeff, is Syttende Mai considered then the Norwegian Independence Day? We have an Independence Day, which is July 4th, separate from a Constitution Day. Do you have an Independence Day?
It's called Constitution Day because we have Norway has become independent in a kind of a process. May 17th is the day when we got our constitutions. We became more independent than we have been under Danish rule. On June 7th, 1905, Norway gained its total independence from Sweden. June 7th is a flag day. It's an official flag day, but May 17th has a higher status. Mm-hmm. So we do not call it. We don't. So June 7th is Independence Day, but May 17th is Constitution Day. So Constitution Day has been celebrated more than Independence Day because it was such a. I think that it has something to do with the events in 1814. Norway was semi-independent in 1905. Norway became very much more independent in 1814 than it had been before. It was a much larger impact.
Okay, thank you. That's a wonderful presentation. I think we're ready for Jeff, but your presentation was so very thorough, and I've never seen a presentation on Syttende Mai that was that thorough. It was very, very informative. Jeff, do you have some questions?
Sure. And yes, I want to echo that. I thought this was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. First of all, Sandra Bestland had sent in a comment, and it's very interesting. I want to read it to you here. Her great-great-great-grandfather, Ole Knutsen Tvetten, was a signer of the Norwegian Constitution in 1814. He was born in 1757. He was a farmer and the Vala district sheriff for 50 years. He died in 1837. His farm home is part of a museum. There's a memorial to him at the Vala church, and on the memorial is a quote: "The farmer must have his share," and a wreath is laid in his honor every year on May 17th. That's really interesting. That's really cool. Thank you, Sander. And then Eunice Kvale Sankey had asked a question about the Rus, and then you answered that in a slide right afterwards. So she also sent us a note saying that her question had been answered. And then I have a question too. So how is the Norwegian Constitution and Syttende Mai taught today in the schools? How is, in other words, is it incorporated in the general civics education that students receive?
Yes, it's an important part of that. I've been a teacher myself, and it's a part of the curriculum. May 17th, and the Constitution usually makes up a separate chapter in the school books. In terms of history and civics education, and the constitutions and democracy and human rights is also taught in schools. Not necessarily as a part of the history curriculum, but as a part of more of a civic education. Now, how society is being built up and so on. But they show that we find the roots of our democracy in the Constitution.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and here we have another comment from Sandra Bestland, also very interesting. During the American Civil War, the 15th Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry Regiment, which was also called the Scandinavian Regiment, had a Company B that called themselves the Wergeland Guards, after the Norwegian poet. Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Thank you.
Virginia Blood says, the Germans saw Norwegians as a higher race. Does that opinion exist in Norway?
Today?
She doesn't say, but maybe you could answer it. Did it exist during the occupation years, and does it exist today?
That's a very good question, and this is also in the middle of a big debate in Norway now. When we are there is a debate. There is a program in Norwegian television that's about Norwegian soldiers who have joined the German SS troops to fight Russians, in the Soviet Union ideologically, and we have right-wing. We have had some right-wing persons belonging to the right wing who have been connected to the to Nazi sympathies in Norway. But I think that Norway is an open country, but there is a we had in 2011 we had you may remember this terrible massacre that took place with Anders Behring Breivik, who killed altogether 77 people because he had some sympathies to keep immigrants out of Norway. That means immigrants of non-Western background in Norway. He wrote a manifest stating this, looking at himself as a crusader to prevent Norwegian values should be protected and not be affected by immigrants from other countries. So there is an ideology that exists among some people, but I think that most Norwegians resent these thoughts today, and I think that May 17th should be a day when people should get together and celebrate democracy and freedom. But I know also that some immigrants from other cultures wearing Norwegian bunad has been frowned upon by Norwegians, by ethnic Norwegians, because I think that they should not wear a bunad. So I think that May 17th should be a rallying, should rally instead of dividing.
Thank you. Next comment comes from Joanne Parker. Bjornstjerne Bjornsson is on her family tree. And she says, we enjoyed visiting his home and seeing the photographs of the children's parade on his farm. He would serve hot chocolate to all the children there. If there is interest in seeing how popular and loved he was, you can go online and look at the photos from his funeral in the early 1900s. And she says, it looks like the crowd from Princess Diana's funeral. And she thanks you for your presentation and all the beautiful photographs as well. Another question from Karen Laum. How does modern day Norway conceptualize maintaining its independence today and in the future. How does this inform its military preparation and defense?
That's a good question. One criticism in Norway, a criticism has occurred among others because Norway is not a part of the European Union. The European Union has about 27 or 29 member countries. Norway is affiliated with the European Union, but Norway has to accept laws and rules that are imposed on us by the European Union. So many think that Norway has lost some of our independence because we are forced to accept legislation from the European Union. This kind of, that gives Norway lesser to say, less to in our own affairs. Well, of course, Norway is part of NATO, and with the USA and Canada and many countries in Europe, and I think that is a solid, that is a good organization to join. But of course, Norway is in a very special position because we are also a neighbor country to Russia, which traditionally has been an adversary or on a foe to NATO. So Norway is kind of trying to balance this system. In fact, the Soviet Union or Russia is the only neighboring country to Norway which has never attacked Norway. So, but still, we have to keep a kind of a balance. But we are solidly within the NATO sphere, and I think that's a good way to be. But we should not offend our neighbors. So I think that Norway is doing a wise thing by maintaining this balance.
Thank you. Right now, there are no more questions in the chat. Jerry, do you have any questions?
Well, unless there are more questions that come up, I thought you might want to talk about the Norwegian Emigrant Museum, which is pictured behind you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. This is the Norwegian Emigrant Museum near Hamar. You see a church in the background, a white church. This church was located outside of Spring Grove, Minnesota. We have 7 other buildings that were built in the Midwest and that have been moved to the Emigrant Museum. We're the only museum in Norway which focuses entirely on immigration from Norway. We have a national outreach, and we use the buildings and a large archive and a large library to document and to present the history of Norwegian immigration to the United States and to other locations in the world. And we have taken initiative nationally to launch a bicentennial commemoration in 2025 to commemorate immigration, and also to put more emphasis on how migration can affect and build societies. And it should also be relevant to take a look at immigration to Norway today. And we're now in the process of creating research on migration that will give new findings and new evidence to explain the migration experience. But I think that having the buildings at the museum is much easier. They are kind of objects that we can use in our presentation of the immigrant experience among Norwegians in the Midwest. And and we hope to we hope to keep our ties with the States. We have good ties with institutions like Vesterheim, Norwegian American Historical Association, the National Nordic Museum in Seattle. So we're also coordinating our efforts in Norway with the efforts of the US 2025 committee.
I wonder if somebody stops in Norway and goes to the museum, what would they expect to encounter? And especially the logs have, one of our activities is genealogy. Are there things there that would help a person developing their genealogy, and what else do they have at the museum?
Absolutely. We have a number of books, genealogy books, and also we also have Friends of the Museum organization who are very helpful in helping people find their roots in Norway. So we have a network of people that we can connect to visitors who wish to find their family, in addition to archival material that may be helpful for them to find. And if we don't have it at the museum, we will be able to tell them where to go. And anyway, we will appreciate having a visit just to see the nice location of the park we have. We have a cafe. So I think that it would be a nice experience for those who visit us.
How is the museum funded?
It's funded by public funds. We are part of an organization called Anno, and we receive our funds from the Ministry of Culture in Norway, which is divided then on the Anno's various departments. We form one museum out of 6 in that organization. Mm-hmm. We also have a non-profit organization in the US. So we're the only museum in that organization, which also have a link to abroad. So this non-profit organization, which is based in Decorah, Iowa, is also a means to channel funding, non-profit with tax-deductible funding from those who are interested in supporting the museum. So this is also an option in addition.
So if somebody wanted to make a contribution, they could do it through that extension. Do you have the name of that?
It's called the Norwegian Emigrant Museum Incorporated.
In Decorah.
Yes, the funds are in yes, they're in the bank, the Citizen Bank the bank in Decorah, and I think the information is on our website.
Okay. Yeah.
And I must see that Elaine Hazelton sent an email now that one of our partners in the US is also the Bygdelag, the Norwegian Bygdelags, Bygdelagens Fellesråd.
Fellesråd,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions for you now that come in the last few minutes. So I want to get to those before we get off here. First of all, Karen Laum again asks an interesting question. Which country has received the greatest number of Norwegian immigrants over time? Is it the United States?
Yes, the United States, about between 850,000 and 900,000 people after 1825. And that's a very large amount. We think that about 1 million immigrants have left Norway after 1825, and of those, 850 to 900,000 left for the United States.
What would be it would be Canada would be the second?
Yes, that's correct. Canada would be the second, and then also Australia, New Zealand, and a number of others, but Canada would be the second. And we should not forget Argentina and Chile as well.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting. Sherry asks, does the museum have documents or other information from other fylke on immigration? I think perhaps she meant emigration, but fylke, like, for instance, Agder.
Yes, yes, we do. And we're now in the process. We're in a process, in a dialogue with the Family Search to digitize our entire archive and to put that online. So that will be interesting. So, but yes, we do have features from various counties in Norway.
Okay, great. Joanne Parker's wondering, would you be interested in people from the United States submitting information to the museum that might be helpful?
Yes, very much so. We'll welcome that very much. So we're still building our collections, and we would very much like to receive more documentation about the immigrant experience. Yes.
And once again, they would go to your website to contact you.
Yes.
To discuss the possibility of submitting that information.
Absolutely.
Okay. Lori Miller says, in the U.S., we're used to an elected president. Can you please talk about the role and the powers of the king in Norway?
The king today has only a symbolic role, but the king and the government together form the executive branch of the of the powers. But the king used to have more power when the constitution was written. But the king had a cabinet or a government. The king was located in Sweden. He had a government of Norwegians, but they had their seat in Stockholm, Sweden, and were only part-time in Christiania, Norway. So the king had a larger had a larger impact on politics earlier. But then in 1884, we introduced the parliamentary system. That means that the king could not elect the cabinet anymore. He could not put his print on the politics. A judicial case in 1884 made the Storting or the parliament stronger. It gave more power to the parliament. So since 1884, the Norwegian government, the members of the government, must be based on the majority of parties in the parliament. It's not the king who decides who could be in the government, but the government should consist of the parties that have the most votes or the most representatives in parliament. So the king today, by that, that made the king's role became weaker. So today the king is only plays a symbolic role, but still an important role. During the war, he was a rallying symbol, rallying figure. But the king always has to sign every law. That the proposition does not become law until the king has signed the document. But this is only a symbolic gesture. But I would say that the government plays the important role in the politics of Norway today. But they and the king form this executive branch of the Norwegian ruling system.
My understanding is that the king has veto power, and modern day kings have vetoed legislation twice, and that they should be very cautious about what they veto because maybe there wouldn't be a king very long. So I don't know what your reaction is to that.
No, the veto power, yes, that played a role in that parliamentary system when that was introduced in the 1880s. But although the king has a veto power according to the constitution, it has not been posed any problems, or it has not been a discussion about that. It has not been used actively.
Yeah.
So although it's there, it doesn't play an important role.
Yeah. Jeff, do you have any more questions?
Yes, just a second. We got two more here. Karen Lom again is asking, are most interpretive signs and information in your museum in English as well as Norwegian?
Yes, both in English and Norwegian.
Okay, great.
Yes. And our website is also both in English and Norwegian.
Okay, great. I'm not quite understanding Joanne. Joanne Parker has questioned historical information regarding Yeah, I'm not quite. I don't quite understand Joanne's question here. She was asking about historical family information regarding immigration and life in the U.S. Oh, I see. She had asked a question earlier about submitting information to your museum, and she's asking if this would be appropriate. So, in other words, historical family information about their immigration and then their life thereafter in the U.S.
Very much so. That's very a part of.
Very interesting.
Yes.
Okay, great. And we have no more questions. In the chat, the website for the Emigrant Museum has been posted there. So if you want to visit the museum, the way I usually get to it is I go to Google and I type in Norwegian Emigrant Museum, Norway, and boom, it's usually right at the top. So.
Yes.
And Karen is saying, tusen takk, and I want to echo that. Tusen takk. We don't have any more questions. I think we can, I'll turn it over to you, Jerry, and you can finish up for us here, if you'd like.
Okay, that's fine. Terje, it was a wonderful presentation. Is in much greater detail than I ever expected and very informative. And your willingness to go to this effort is very much appreciated. I'm sure the whole audience felt very edified by what you provided. And hope to see you again. Hope to see you in the United States sometime. Maybe you can come to our Stevne in 2022.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That'd be great.
And happy Syttende Mai.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. George, did you want to speak?
Other than mange tusen takk.
Yeah.
Mange tusen takk.
So we'll be back for the afternoon session. That will begin at 1 o'clock. You'll be able to actually log on a little bit earlier than that. And I do suggest that you maybe log into the afternoon session about 15 minutes before we start.
Yeah. Talk to me, yeah?
Yeah. With that, we will end the session. Thank you very, very much, Terje.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ha det bra.
Ha det.
Ha det bra.